I first realized something was off the moment my phone buzzed with a text from my fiance's younger sister, Lila. She had always been a little too eager to poke holes in my confidence, but this time, the smug tone radiating from her words felt sharper. "Guess who I'm seeing these days," she wrote, followed by a winking emoji. My heart sank when she revealed it was Mark, my high school ex-boyfriend. We had dated during a tumultuous senior year, the kind of relationship that leaves behind scars you don't want reopened. That Lila had managed to find him in the vast city and deliberately latched on felt like a direct hit. For a split second, I questioned if it was a joke, but Lila didn't do jokes like that. She went for what hurt most. She was the type who found your deepest bruise and pressed on it until you flinched. Lila wasn't just my fiance's sister, she was a constant thorn in everyone's side. She had an uncanny ability to sniff out people's vulnerabilities, then exploit them as though it were a personal sport. I met her shortly after Jordan and I started dating, and I remember feeling uneasy at our very first dinner together. She would stare at me with this knowing grin, as if she already had pages of personal notes on me, waiting for the perfect moment to use them to her advantage. Over time, I realized she thrived on control and chaos. If she sensed I was content, she would swoop in, ask invasive questions, or make sly remarks that chipped away at my self-esteem. It wasn't obvious sabotage, it was a slow, calculated drip of toxicity. And her newest move, roping Mark back into my life, was more than just a jab. It felt downright insidious. Mark had been my first real love, the boy who scribbled our initials on the underside of the bleachers in a flourish of teenage bravado. But that was the same boy who left me crying by the lockers when he decided to cheat on me with my lab partner. High school heartbreak felt like the end of the world, and even though time dulled the pain, a bitter aftertaste remained. When I heard Lila had somehow tracked him down, I wrestled with an immediate sense of betrayal all over again. She knew how that chapter of my life ended, and she chose him specifically because she was aware it would dig under my skin. The worst part was how she flaunted it. Pictures on social media, coy references in group chats, and a pointed mention of how handsome she found him now. No boundaries, no remorse, she dived straight into the role of antagonist. When I confronted Jordan, hoping he might talk some sense into his sister, he simply sighed and rubbed his temples. "You know Lila," he said with defeat in his voice. "She's going to do whatever she wants. Fighting her only makes it worse." He wasn't wrong. Standing up to Lila had its consequences. She would usually escalate her petty intrusions, turning even minor disagreements into full-blown wars, but I couldn't just ignore the fact that she was seeing someone who once tore my heart apart. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about boundaries, respect, and basic decency. I tried calmly explaining how hurtful it felt, but Jordan reminded me that Lila never responded well to demands or pleas. If anything, my outrage only fueled her motivation. And that was precisely what terrified me the most. She fed on my discomfort, thriving on the chaos she created. Our wedding date loomed just a few months ahead. The venue was booked, the invitations sent, and every last detail from the seating chart to the floral arrangements was carefully curated. Planning a wedding brought enough stress on its own, but now I had Lila's twisted agenda gnawing at my peace of mind. Every time I checked my messages, I half expected to find a new taunt from her. Perhaps a photo of her and Mark out on a date. A few times, I actually did see them posted up together at some fancy restaurant or comedy club. She would caption it, "What a small world," or "Some things work out just right," with no further explanation. It felt like she was orchestrating a grand psychological operation against me, gleefully poking until I snapped. Even worse was the knowledge that Mark, who once claimed to love me, was complicit in this emotional assault. One evening, I found myself unraveling over a stack of wedding invitations that needed addressing. Jordan tried to help by putting on some music, lighting a scented candle, and reminding me that we would be married soon, building our own life, out of Lila's reach. But she was family, meaning she'd always be around, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life playing defense, second-guessing every move or fearing what bombshell she might drop next. Jordan leaned in and whispered, "She won't change. If you let her see it eats at you, she'll keep going." I knew he was right. Bullies like Lila thrive on reaction. But the cynic in me thought, she's already won because I'm losing sleep and mental peace over this nonsense. Unfortunately, the tension was about to peak in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. I just didn't realize how soon it would come. About 2 weeks before the wedding, Lila casually announced in a group text with Jordan's family that she would be bringing a special someone as her +1. Everyone responded with polite curiosity. Jordan's parents, some aunts and cousins, all delighted she might be settling down. But I knew exactly who that special someone was, and that knowledge churned my stomach into knots. She had made no secret of her relationship with Mark, yet it was still shocking to see her declare it so openly. Maybe she wanted to rub it in my face in front of the entire family, or maybe she relished the thought of seeing me squirm on my wedding day. When I showed Jordan, he just shook his head in exasperation. "We can't ban her from bringing a guest," he said. "That would look awful to my parents." Rationally, I agreed, but emotionally, I was reeling. My only solace was a quiet hope that something might derail their plan. As the date inched closer, I busied myself with last-minute preparations, confirming the cake design, checking on the caterer, and finalizing a seating chart that threatened to give me migraines. I placed Lila and Mark as far from me as possible, but part of me worried she'd find a way to creep into the spotlight anyway. My mother, sensing the tension I tried so hard to mask, offered gentle reassurance. She reminded me to focus on the bigger picture, marrying the man I loved, surrounded by people who cared about us. But it was easy for others to say, "Just ignore her," when they weren't the ones who'd have to stand in a white dress, scanning the crowd, knowing an old wound was gaping open. Worse still, Jordan was trying to keep the peace, attempting to talk Lila out of bringing Mark without making it an outright demand, but she stonewalled him. A week before the ceremony, we hosted a small pre-wedding dinner for immediate family, an attempt to smooth any wrinkles and boost morale before the big day. Lila breezed in late, looking smug and unapologetic, and I noticed she wore a piece of jewelry I recognized immediately, the silver necklace Mark had once given me back in high school. It had a tiny pendant shaped like a heart with a keyhole in the center. My hands clenched into fists beneath the tablecloth as she laughed her way through dinner, sharing stories about their romantic outings. Occasionally, her gaze flicked to mine, gauging my reaction like a cat watching a trapped mouse. Even Jordan's parents sensed the tension, darting glances in my direction as if to say, "Are you okay? Should we step in?" But Lila was a master at masking cruelty behind a veneer of charm. I left that night feeling unsettled. The morning of the wedding arrived, and despite the storm brewing in my head, I felt a cautious optimism stirring in my chest. My bridesmaids fluttered around me in floral robes, fussing over hair and makeup, while the photographer snapped candids of everyone laughing and drinking champagne. For a precious few hours, I let myself forget about Lila and Mark. Today was supposed to be about Jordan and me, our love story culminating in vows and a promise of forever. I tried to focus on the intangible magic of that moment. My father came in to see me before the ceremony, tears glistening in his eyes as he kissed my cheek. All that mattered, I told myself, was Jordan and me standing together, promising a future. Nobody, not even Lila, could poison that if I didn't let them. But I had underestimated just how far her cruelty would stretch. The ceremony itself was held in a sun-drenched garden, roses in bloom and soft music floating through the air. My heart pounded as I walked down the aisle, locking eyes with Jordan, feeling the surge of love and excitement that overshadowed everything else for a fleeting instant. I scanned the guests briefly, noticing Lila in a tight-fitting dress of deep red, her arm looped through Mark's. My stomach lurched, but I forced my gaze forward, determined not to let them spoil the moment. The vows went by in a blur of emotion. Jordan's voice trembled with sincerity when he promised to stand by me in every joy and challenge. When we exchanged rings, I felt tears prick my eyes, a wave of gratitude washing over me. For that singular moment, I almost forgot Lila and her twisted scheme. Little did I know the reception would become her stage for theatrics. The garden transformed into a reception hall brimming with white lights, fresh floral centerpieces, and tables overflowing with good food and champagne. I clung to Jordan's hand, weaving through the crowd of congratulatory hugs and well wishes. Eventually, we settled at the sweetheart table, a glittering focal point where we could survey everyone we loved. A sense of achievement warmed me, all the stress, all the sleepless nights, and it was finally happening. But then, I spotted Lila and Mark drifting toward the dance floor. Her eyes locked with mine, and she smirked in a way that said, "Watch this." The music slowed, couples beginning to sway, and she pressed herself against Mark, arms circling his neck. My face burned. It felt like a taunt, a demonstration that my past heartbreak stood right in front of me, now with my sister-in-law. Jordan squeezed my hand, whispering that I should ignore them. Ignoring them proved impossible. Throughout the night, Lila found small ways to insert herself into every spotlighted moment. During the cake cutting, she yelled out for us to feed each other bigger bites. When Jordan and I shared our first dance, she dragged Mark onto the floor next to us. Her tactics were calculated, each interruption more brazen than the last. I felt the fuse in me burning dangerously low. Worse, I overheard her telling a cousin about how she and Mark were so in love, sprinkling in details about their steamy nights like it was casual gossip. She must have known my cousin would run back and relay it to me. Every moment brimmed with tension, and I kept waiting for something to snap. But in a turn I never anticipated, karma arrived dressed in its own wedding finery. A single revelation would unravel her entire grand performance that night. It began innocently enough with our DJ announcing a short break before the toasts. Guests either found their seats or refilled their drinks. Meanwhile, one of Jordan's uncles, a jovial man with a penchant for telling long-winded stories, struck up a conversation with Mark, unaware of the tension swirling beneath the surface. I watched from a distance, expecting some harmless chit-chat, but then Jordan's uncle paused, gave Mark a puzzled look, and asked something that made Mark visibly twitch. The uncle shook his head in confusion, and suddenly Mark's entire face reddened. Lila sauntered over, presumably to rescue him from awkwardness, but the uncle just turned to her with the same question. From across the room, I couldn't hear every word, yet the shift in Lila's expression told me something serious was being revealed. Her confident smile flickered like a light bulb about to burn out. I inched closer, heart hammering, senses buzzing. Suddenly, Lila snapped, "Don't make a scene!" at Jordan's uncle, which only drew more attention. Heads turned in curiosity, mine included. The uncle raised his hands defensively, insisting he wasn't accusing anyone of anything, just asking a simple question. Did Mark really have another fiancée recently? Time seemed to slow. I blinked in shock, studying Mark's reaction. His eyes dropped to the floor while Lila blustered about how it was nobody's business. But the uncle pushed on, saying he'd recognized Mark's face from a previous event a few towns over where Mark was introduced as someone's fiancé. The rumor swirling around that event was that the engagement ended abruptly amid allegations of fraud. At the word fraud, gasps rippled through nearby guests. My stomach twisted in a maelstrom of shock and strange vindication. Mark was far from innocent. Perhaps Lila was about to learn that the hard way, or worse. The scene escalated. Mark tried to drag Lila away, but Jordan's uncle wasn't done. People huddled closer, half curious, half appalled, until Lila, in a burst of fury, declared that everyone should mind their own business. Yet, in her panic, she revealed a crucial detail. Mark had been borrowing money from her, large sums, and she'd been so certain he would pay her back. Now the crowd sensed a scandal, and whispers sparked like wildfire. Lila looked to Mark with an expression that demanded reassurance, but he just stammered, I can explain," without offering any actual explanation. My heart pounded as I realized how precariously she must have placed her trust in him. A part of me wanted to laugh. This was the kind of karma I hoped would find them. But the spectacle was unfolding at my wedding. The tension grew unbearable, and no one knew where it would lead. Jordan stepped in, attempting to diffuse the tension, but Lila exploded, accusing him of conspiring against her. My mother-in-law, horrified at the public meltdown, tried to pull Lila aside. Meanwhile, Mark looked ready to bolt, as though he realized this entire charade would soon crash down. He muttered something about stepping outside, but Lila grabbed his arm as if refusing to let him escape. I stood near the sweetheart table, watching with a mixture of disbelief and strange satisfaction. Was this truly happening, right here, on what should have been the happiest day of my life? In a final dramatic flourish, Mark turned to Lila and hissed, "I never promised you anything," yanking free from her grip. Her face was a portrait of rage and heartbreak, but I felt no sympathy. She had walked into this trap so sure of her own power. Now she was tasting betrayal. Finally, so. He stormed off, leaving Lila standing amid a gathering of stunned onlookers. The silence that followed felt heavy and suffocating, broken only by the awkward shuffle of feet and the low hum of music still playing. Jordan led me away from the chaos, his expression a mix of concern and apology. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, though none of this was truly his fault. Lila had orchestrated her own downfall by choosing Mark. She had done it to hurt me, yet she ended up hurting herself most of all. I peered back at her, mascara smudged, lips trembling, fury dancing in her eyes. She marched toward the exit, and as she passed me, I thought I heard her say, "This isn't over." But in my heart, I believed it was. She could never wound me the same way again, because she had already shown her hand, and it had lost. The remainder of the reception was a blur of damage control. Guests slowly resumed eating and dancing, though an undercurrent of tension lingered. Jordan's parents apologized, desperate to salvage the evening's spirit. I could see the mortification etched across their faces. Still, I managed to enjoy moments with my relatives and friends, soaking in their hugs and congratulations, letting the drama settle behind me. This was my wedding day, and while it would always carry the memory of Lila's meltdown, it would also be the day I pledged my life to Jordan, the man who stood by me through every tribulation. Eventually, the music picked up again and laughter began to fill the air. People drifted back to the dance floor, one group at a time, until the fiasco was merely another story told on the sidelines. Late into the night, Jordan and I finally left the venue, newly married. In the aftermath, Lila's vendetta against me continued, but it was toothless. Rumors circulated that she confronted Mark privately, demanding the money back, only to discover he had none left. He disappeared soon after, leaving her to nurse both a broken heart and a bruised ego. She tried to shift blame onto me, as though I'd engineered her humiliation, but nobody bought that story. Her parents saw the truth. Lila had been reckless, malicious, and had chosen to meddle in my past for her own twisted amusement. But karma decided her fate, not me. I never offered her forgiveness, nor did she seek it. My self-respect would not permit me to forget her betrayal. I harbored no regret, only a sense of closure. Some people learn from mistakes. Lila seemed only repeat hers. But now she could no longer inflict harm. She had lost her most potent weapon, my vulnerability.